Hello once again, everyone, and welcome to our read-through of the wilds of Gilleigh Loch. Now, I actually don't have too much to say about this one up front, other than I don't believe I've read it since it initially came out, so I'm looking very much forward to diving back into it and getting to re-immerse myself in it at the same time that you guys do. But the biggest and most important thing that I want to share about it before we get started here is that for those of you that may be new here or are otherwise unaware, there is a reoccurring character in this story that pops up every now and again that isn't originally mine. He is from a children's story called The Tiny Turtle that was written by my best friend in the entire world, a Miss Katie Boucher. And I just wanted to share that with you and throw that out there so that when he inevitably gets mentioned and things like that, you know where to properly place the credit. So, sis, if and or when you get to see this, I love you very much. I thank you for trusting me with our little friend here, and I hope that you enjoyed what I did with him. With that being said, though, let us begin our journey here with Chapter 1. How would I describe this place? Actually, it would probably be easier to see if you pictured it yourself. Try your best to imagine a happy place of sorts. Imagine a place where who and what you are completely irrelevant, where all your cares and worries are stripped away, leaving you vulnerable and free. It's a place where the unrelenting noise of the world we know is drowned out by the harmonies of nature, where the wind that blows through the trees and your hair alike smells as sweet as it does fresh. A place where the vibrant colors of the sunrises and sunsets that dance on the surface of the water are a true marvel of God's creation that leaves you as warm-spirited as it does breathless. You might think that a place like this couldn't possibly exist, but I promise you it does. It's my little piece of Eden. It's Gilleigh Loch. Well, I shouldn't really call it my piece of Eden because it didn't start out that way. Hey, let me ask you something. Let's say your life is going a particular way, the way it has since the day you were born, and then all of a sudden it changes. A peculiar sort of person strolls in unexpectedly, doesn't even stay all that long, and still manages to impact it forever. Would you call that God working in a mysterious way, or an example of a sense of humor? Maybe it's both. Either way, if you mixed both of those conclusions up and poured them into a human mold, you'd get Gilleigh. I met Gilleigh Jarden the summer before I turned 18. It was the legendary last summer of childhood before normal kids my age would go forth and try to take the world by the horns. I say normal only because I had to live my day-to-day existence slightly differently compared to others. See, while we weren't what I would call poor, especially when my mom and dad gave us all they had to ensure that my little sister and I had a happy and healthy childhood, but we certainly had to live within our means. As you can probably guess, this meant that there There wasn't a whole lot of great material possessions to go around. Our home wasn't anything to brag about, just a minorly run-down, minimal traditional house surrounded by a rickety chain-link fence that looked as though a stiff breeze would take it down before it did its job of keeping anything in or out. The four of us were packed in there like sardines, but at least it was a roof over our heads. Anyway, we were talking about Gilleigh. The event that would later bring us together went into motion about a week or two after school let out. I remember it was a Friday evening because I had let my hobby of fishing consume the day. I'd spent hours casting my line into whatever pond, creek, and puddle I could find around the city. So I didn't head for home until the sun was starting to fade behind the sea of other houses in the neighborhood. Another good indication that I was late was that my dad beat me home from the manufacturing job that he and millions of other people slaved away at. From the gate, I could see his 1940 four-door Ford sedan parked on our gravel driveway. It was the family car. When Dad wasn't using it to haul himself to work, Mom used it to run her various errands or meet the ladies for a modest gossip brunch. They got it off a used car lot when my mom was pregnant with me, and after all these years of use, rust was slowly overtaking black as the dominant color. Dad always called it Old Reliable, because no matter what the weather or situation you found yourself in, it never let you down. A few steps from the right of the car, seated alone on the steps to the house, was the cutest little girl with blonde curls you'll ever see. She was intently watching her pet turtle wobble in slow motion to reach the blades of grass she held out in her hand. Well, she says pet, I say captive. The poor little bugger got plucked off of the road while trying to cross in front of us during a Sunday drive a few weeks back. When we stopped to help it to safety, Lottie, I'm the only one allowed to call Charlotte that, insisted on taking it home to nurse it back to health, even though there was nothing wrong with it. And you know where it goes from there. Once an animal gets a name, it most likely won't be going back to where it came from. Lottie's concentration on her little friend was only broken by me entering the yard. "Lakin, any luck?" she exclaimed happily, now holding her turtle. "Not anything worth keeping," I replied, while leaning my pole against the outside of the garage. "Hey, I thought Mom told you to let that thing go somewhere," I teased as I walked past her. "His name is Andy," she barked. "And I don't know, I just don't think he's well enough yet." She hated that I refused to call him by the name she had given him. Knowing this, I chuckled, patted her on the head, and went into the house. About this time of night, you could find Mom setting the table for dinner, and Dad at its head, eagerly waiting to dig in. Instead, upon entering, I was greeted by a rack that was without Dad's coat, and the unmistakable smell of dinner burning on the stove. Mom took great pride in her cooking. Never let anything set even a second longer than a recipe called for. So the fact that it was an absolute ruins meant something was wrong. It wasn't until my act of heroism that saved the house itself from being engulfed in flames that I found out just how wrong things were. Over the clanging of frantically moving things about and putting things out, I heard voices overflowing from the next room. Although muffled, they sounded urgent and desperate, almost argumentative. The harder I focused, the clearer I was able to make out that they belonged to a man and woman. Mom and Dad. Now normally, I'd frown on the idea of eavesdropping on your parents, but being that mine rarely argued, and even more rarely felt the need to have conversations in the privacy of their own room, I had to see what had them acting so bizarrely. Against my better judgment, I gently pressed my ear to the door, held my breath, and listened in. Layoffs was the first thing I was able to understand before. I didn't want to tell you till I knew for sure. "What are we gonna do, Thomas?" Mom asked, on the verge of hysterics. "That job was barely keeping us above water, and we've got bills to pay, kids to feed." I know," Dad answered sheepishly. He knew how serious Mom was whenever she used his name instead of the usual dear or honey. Mom, the quick thinker she was, found a possible solution before he could finish his thought. "Well, maybe I could look for some secretarial work. There's a lot of office parks around the city, and..." Absolutely not, Leanne," Dad fired back, showing he was getting serious now. "You hated working behind a desk, and I took this job so you wouldn't have to." Mom only continued to plead her case. "Oh, but it would only be until you find..." "I said no," he interrupted. "We have to keep things as normal as possible for the kids. As for a plan, I'll look for work anywhere with an opening, anywhere that will have me, starting first thing tomorrow morning. Any place that isn't open, I'll visit Monday." Mom could only reply with the sounds of sniffles and gentle whimpers, as she was overcome with worry. This was met with the softest words I've ever heard my dad speak. "Hey now, everything's gonna be all right. This isn't our first rodeo, and we're gonna make it through this, just like all the times before. You just gotta trust me." I can only imagine things ended in a loving embrace, because I heard Mom's whimpers turn to sobs as she muttered, "I do. Of course I do. Always," into his neck. That was my cue to stop listening. I can remember the nausea, dizziness, and chest pain I felt simultaneously at that moment, and thinking that I was dying, that this news I was never meant to hear was going to kill me right then and there. But in actuality, it was just my heart breaking. Hearing the uncertainty in Dad's voice and fear in Mom's cries was all too much for me. In an emotional haze, I pried myself from their door and bounced my way down the short hallway leading to the bathroom. Shutting the door behind me as quietly as I could, I collapsed with my head in the toilet, hoping to dry heave the feeling of helplessness away. Tears were the only fluid that came out of me during the little pity party I had right there on the bathroom floor. I cursed a lot of things that day. First I cursed the bathroom floor for being so cold. Then I cursed God for yet again not cutting us the tiniest bit of slack. As far as I was concerned, things couldn't get much worse. We already watched my dad work his hands to the bone to give us what little we had, and now he was preparing to work himself to death so we could keep it. It just wasn't fair. There had to be something I could do. I thought harder than I ever have in my whole life that day. I even bounced my head off the wall a time or two, hoping it would knock something loose. Then, just before I pulled a muscle or knocked myself unconscious, whichever came first, it hit me. Light as a whisper, yet heavy as a brick wall. I'd been given the most wonderfully crazy, most marvelously stupid idea. I was going to get a summer job to help out, to pull my weight. It was perfect. Now, if you're thinking that idea doesn't sound all that stupid or crazy to you, then you didn't know my dad. See, he was kind of a complicated man. Similar to how Mom took pride in her food, he took pride in his role within the family. He was the head of the household, the provider, and if anyone so much as lifted a finger to do something he felt was his responsibility, he took it as a great personal insult. Can you imagine what it would do to him to know that his son got a job to put food on the table while he struggled to find work? Oh, it would kill him. The one job we as kids were not only allowed but expected to have was getting good grades. Education was very important to Dad. He knew he didn't have the money to send us to college, but I think he appreciated the idea more than anything. He wanted so badly for Lottie and me to find success and have better lives than the one he gave us. I never fully understood why he viewed himself so poorly, especially because, in my eyes, he was the best dad in the world. That's why he couldn't know about this idea. Going behind your parents' back with anything is always a risky business. I didn't want to do it, but I needed to. Oddly, once I came to terms with that, my illness faded and I was uplifted. The excitement I felt in my new sense of purpose was a dramatic difference from the utter despair I felt only minutes earlier. I couldn't get too far ahead of myself, though. All I had was a plan to save the day, but it still needed an execution phase. I would have to figure that part out later, though, as my concentration was ruined by a hearty knock on the door. "Lakin, you in there?" I heard Dad call out. I answered him by getting off the floor and opening the door. The look of contentment on his face surprised me as he continued. "Hey, buddy, you feeling okay?" "Perfect, Dad, just perfect," I answered, greeting him with a playful punch on the arm. Together we walked into the kitchen, where my mom was next to greet me. "Lakin, honey, how was fishing?" she asked, while standing at the stove and doing her best to hide the fact she'd been crying. "Not good. He could only catch babies," Lottie interrupted as she and Andy were taking a spot at the table. "That's too bad. We could have really used some fish since dinner got away from me a bit," Mom replied with a mixture of disappointment and sympathy in her voice. "It's just got a bit of extra color to it. That's all," Dad teased, as he hung his coat on the rack where it belonged. Dad's light-heartedness on the matter was infectious and brought a subtle smile across her face. "Yes, well, peanut butter and jellies are about all I have on such short notice." "Nothing wrong with that," Dad exclaimed with childlike enthusiasm. "I used to eat them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner when I was Charlotte's age, and look how big and strong I grew." Hearing this, a puzzled look came across Lottie's face. We could see the wheels in her brain turning to produce an innocent thought. "Mommy, do you think if we fed Andy peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, it would help him grow faster?" "No, darling," she replied in a chuckle before getting stern. "And you best not have that turtle at the table again, young lady." "Yeah, we all know the only time it's acceptable for a turtle to be seated at the table is when it's in a soup," Dad teased, tickling Lottie before taking his seat. "You can't eat Andy," she squealed happily. "No, I suppose you're right. Andy is much too small to satisfy my appetite," he replied with a smile. With all the joking, you'd swear that this evening was no different from any other, and there was nothing wrong. But it was in the awkward silences between the banter that it showed the most. That's where the dance began. It was the team of a husband and wife going around and round with their son, neither person knowing what the other side did or didn't know. In conversation, we gracefully tiptoed around the elephant in the room, ignoring it despite it being so obvious it might as well have been sitting on our chests. The only one that didn't notice it was Lottie. I can't speak for my parents, but I knew that this would be the first and only time I'd be envious of my little sister. The way she sat there, just smiling a toothy smile, her face caked in peanut butter and jelly, unaware that there were other problems in her world outside of caring for her reptilian friend. I wanted that, longed for it now. The rest of the night went by quickly, and before long it was time for bed. Dad had fallen asleep in his favorite lounging chair as usual, and Mom was more than physically tired. So after a brief good night, it was up to me to get Lottie tucked in and off to sleep. Of course, we shared a room. There wasn't a whole lot of room between the two of us, but it was cozy. Lottie's bed was along the eastern wall, directly in front of the door, and mine was along the western wall, diagonal from hers. At the foot of my bed, separating me from the door, was a desk. Lottie would often use it to draw crude representations of her family and such, while I used it to pursue my other hobby. I loved to write stories. I can remember spending hours and hours at that desk, pouring my inspiration onto paper. While I don't necessarily think anything I wrote back then was great, it was easy to practice and test ideas out on my pint-sized roommate. She could be a harsh critic, too, but she grew fond of the adventures I would craft, starring Andy, and soon the tiny turtle became part of our nightly routine. She always fell asleep before I made it far into the story. I'd read the entire thing only to find her out cold with my literary inspiration on her chest. Normally, when I placed him back in his home on her nightstand, I took a moment to watch how peacefully and angelic she slept, but on this night, I watched a little longer. Before I turned out the light, I kissed her on the head and said a prayer that tomorrow I'd find a job that would make everything all right again. Chapter 2. Morning felt as though it took no time at all to arrive. Although it had been difficult to drift off to sleep the night before, it was even more difficult to coax myself out of bed. I just laid there, eyes closed, and let the light of the new day warm my face as it shined through the few small windows we had in the room. It would have been a beautiful day for fishing, but there wouldn't be time for that. The importance of today made me anxious. More so because I still hadn't thought of a solution for finding a job in secret. I couldn't very well wander around the city like my dad was doing, could I? What if we ran into each other? It wasn't worth the risk, so I decided to stay in bed until a better idea came to mind. That was short-lived, however, as just as I was about to fall into a deep sleep again, I was startled awake by the sudden boom of the Looney Tunes theme. I sat straight up and discovered that the sweet and savory aroma of sausage and pancakes had also crept in. With a sigh, I gave in and reluctantly made the effort to start my day. Emerging from my room, I found the atmosphere in the house to be calm and familiar. Lottie and Andy were plopped in front of our black and white television, enjoying their Saturday morning, and Mom was glowing with her usual beauty as she buzzed around the kitchen. Everything was as it should be, though not perfect. "Good morning, sleepyhead. Can I fix you some breakfast?" she asked in an upbeat tone as I approached the table. "Yes, please," I responded in a yawn, trying to wipe the sleep from my eyes. My plate came together with the elegance of a figure skater as Mom fluttered around the kitchen, humming as she went. Don't get me wrong, I was glad to see her so happy, but I was more amazed at how well she was portraying as normal as possible, like Dad had wanted. "There's more where that came from. You can have your father's share if you're still hungry," she said, while putting the food in front of me with a smile. The minuscule mention of my dad there created an opening, which I used to test how far my mom was willing to take this facade. "Where is Dad?" I asked while scarfing down my meal. I watched the body language in her response very carefully. The look she gave me was evidence that her poker face wasn't exactly unbreakable. He's out. He had some errands to run, I think. He left before the paper arrived this morning, and I don't expect him back until dinner." I know she thought she was being clever by keeping her answer both as vague and broad as possible, so I wouldn't feel the need to dig deeper. But unbeknownst to her, I already knew what I needed and had caught her in her lie. Turns out, that's how committed she was to keeping this secret. Just then, it was like my brain got stuck on something she said, not allowing me to think forward. Before the paper arrived this morning, I recalled silently. "Wait, the paper. The newspaper. That's it. I could use the classified section of the newspaper to begin my search from home, make a phone call or two, and have it back next to my dad's chair before he notices I touched it." While lost in my thoughts, I could hear Mom trying to get my attention. "Lakin, Lakin, Lakin," I finally heard as her voice faded into existence. "Huh? I'm sorry, Mom. What did you say?" I asked, startled out of my daze. "I said, it's a beautiful day outside, and after I get these dishes taken care of, I'm going to take Charlotte and Andy out to play. Would you like to join us?" "Oh, no thanks, Mom. I've got something I have to do," I stuttered in reply. "In fact, why don't you let me clean up so the three of you can enjoy the weather sooner?" "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion. "Absolutely," I fired back. "You cooked, I'll clean. It's the least I can do." I could tell she was floored by my offer, but after a few moments she accepted before turning her attention to Lottie. "All right then, dear. Charlotte, that's enough television for now. Why don't we turn it off and take Andy out to play?" Lottie responded with her famous smile and did as she was told, leading the way out the door. I'm not sure, but I think I broke some sort of speed record for washing dishes that day. I couldn't believe my luck. Not only did I go from not having a plan to my mom giving me a brilliant one that I'm surprised I didn't think of, but now the two people with the capability to spoil it were willingly removed to make sneaking around easier. However, the privacy I had just been bought would only last as long as Mom could keep Lottie entertained, so I had to work fast. Once I made sure the kitchen was spotless, the next target to receive my attention was the newspaper. I bounded across the house while keeping an eye over my shoulder so I could react accordingly, if I got caught. The paper was lying face down on the end table, so when I grabbed it, the first headline was the headline was the first thing I saw. "Factory calls for layoffs, hundreds affected." Maybe it was sick, but I chuckled at the idea that it took literal hours for some no-name journalist to share my family's secret with the entire city. I don't know what hit me funnier, that or how easy it would have been for the cat to be let out of the bag just by looking at the newspaper. With the coast remaining Mom and Lottie free, I took it to the safety of my room, where I sat down at my desk and grabbed a piece of paper. I figured any circle, underline, or scribble I'd make on whatever ads I took note of would be a dead giveaway of my tampering. This would keep it clean. I was ready now. The paper was right in front of me, but no matter how much I hoped for something good to be waiting between the pages, I was hesitant to open them. I couldn't be disappointed if I didn't look, right? I did, though. Dove right in, actually, and combed through those ads like I was looking for diamonds. I came across a lot of the typically available positions. Soda jerk at one of the local diners or ice cream parlors, clerk at the Five and Dime, concession worker at the drive-in. Nothing out of the ordinary for minimum wage. I would have settled on one, though, if it hadn't been for another that stuck out and completely stole my breath away. Caregiver/handyman, looking for capable individual to provide daily caregiving and aid with household chores and projects for an elderly woman. Position will be needed daily, 5 days a week, for a $90 weekly wage. Location is on Inverness Road in Ottersboro. Call to arrange an interview. This must be a dream, I thought. That's gotta be it. I never really made it out of bed this morning, and very soon I'll open my eyes and be staring at my ceiling. It couldn't have been real. $90 a week was more than my dad made at the factory. Whoever placed this ad definitely had money to throw around, and was going to use it to ensure they got the best care possible for this elderly woman. I had to take down the information multiple times because my shaky hands made it illegible. I did my best to calm myself down in case it was all some kind of joke, but before I knew it, the butterflies I had in my stomach, that were the size of eagles, were carrying me toward the phone. It was on the wall nearest the door, and still within reach of the kitchen window, so I could keep an eye on the yard. As I watched Lottie and Mom playing together, I reminded myself that I was doing this for them. If it ended up being a joke, then fine, I would just make a different call for a different job, but if it wasn't, it would change everything. My clammy fingers made it difficult to turn the dial, and clenched throat made it difficult to speak to the switchboard operator. Once I had been properly redirected, I heard my heartbeat in my ears with every ring. 1 ring, 2 ring, 3 rings, and then, "Jarden residence," a female voice answered, sounding dignifyingly snobby, like she had a million better things to do, like she had a million better things she could be doing than answering the phone and talking to the likes of me. Instantly intimidated, I fumbled over my response, trying to sound as professional as I could. "Yes, my name is Lakin Adams, and I'm calling about your ad in the newspaper. Is the position still available?" I crossed my fingers, toes, heart, and everything else I could think of to make it be. "It is. You're interested, then?" the woman asked, seemingly annoyed at knowing she'd have to guide me through this interaction. "I am, very much so," I replied with a dose of enthusiasm. "The ad said to call and set up an "I know what it said," she barked back in a landlady tone. "You may come by tomorrow. Shall we say 12 o'clock sharp?" "Yes, ma'am, that would be just fine," I answered. "Do you have any inquiries?" she asked, obviously hoping I didn't. "Yes, your address. What's the rest of it?" "It only says Inverness Road." "You don't need the rest of it." She quickly dismissed. We're the only house on the Loch. I rebounded with the real question on my mind that I was afraid to ask. And the money, the $90 a week. Is that correct? It is. Is there a problem? She asked, clearly losing patience. No, no problem at all, I replied in disbelief. I'll be there tomorrow at noon. Instead of ending the conversation with a polite, mutual farewell, it was ended abruptly as the woman hung up on me. In ways, I'm glad she did, because nearly fainting over the phone after discussing money would not have looked very professional. There wasn't time to be spread eagle on the kitchen floor either, because as soon as I placed the phone back on the hook, I saw two shapes and a turtle trotting toward the house. Panic washed over me as I realized that in all my excitement over the job, I forgot to return the newspaper to its proper place. If either of them were to find it on my desk, open to the classifieds, my goose would be cooked. They were only steps away. I had to act fast. Sadly, my legs couldn't work as fast as my brain, and I made it a step or two out of my room with it before I heard the door open and was face to face with my mom. I was busted. Coincidentally, Mom had the same look of panic on her face when she noticed me holding the paper that screamed, "Your dad lost his job," in big letters. What are you doing with the paper, sweetheart?" she asked timidly. With the situation I currently found myself in, it was time to test my commitment to keeping my share of the secret. "I was just reading the comics, Mom. Dennis the Menace was a good one today." I was no better than her. I heard the relief in her voice. "Oh, and who was on the phone?" "Oh, that was Crocker. He wants to go fishing tomorrow at noon." Two lies told seamlessly back to back. I was now worse than my mom. It was contagious. It was a parasite that made my skin crawl, thinking about how easily the second one spilled out. I wasn't proud, but I think she bought it. At least enough to allow me to put the newspaper back. And that is where we are going to cut this first episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you in the next one.